What is the freakiest, creepiest thing that's ever happened to you? Serious. I had a roommate who was always a complete asshole. Never was polite or kind to anyone. One night after I helped his drunk ass to bed, he turned to me and said, "I really appreciate you and I know you don't like seeing me like this. You've been a good roommate and friend. Thank you." I found him dead the next morning due to an undiagnosed heart condition that alcohol had amplified. Not creepy or freaky in the normal sense, but I will never forget how serious and genuine he was in his last words spoken ever. It was the first time I had ever heard him compliment anyone. In 1991 I went to a 7-Eleven by myself when we were at my grandmother's house. There was another kid there about my age, we looked similar, etc. I bought a Slurpee and walked back to my grandma's house and that was that. The other kid was kidnapped and murdered, pretty much right after leaving that 7-Eleven. The only thing I can think of that kept it from being me was maybe I won some sort of cosmic coin toss. The police are pretty sure they know who did it but couldn't prove it, and to this day it still weirds me out. I'm 41 now and live in that neighborhood. I could hear a woman's voice singing almost inaudibly on my daughter's baby monitor. It happened a few nights in a row. I began thinking back over all the doors that opened on their own, and weird noises in the house. After a week I had almost convinced myself the house was haunted. Then one night I heard the woman's voice singing clearly for the first time. It was Taylor Swift singing Bad Blood. Turns out I just live in an old house and my cheap Chinese baby monitor can just hardly pick up the local pop station if it's a clear night. I worked at a subway during a period of time where a serial robber was hitting multiple subways each day, and becoming violent. I worked at a particular subway that was the easiest target of them all. One employee at night, not in a shopping center, off from the main road, small parking lot covered with trees. The cops would actually come check on me at night due to how sure they were this dude was gonna rob it. One night a guy came in and started fidgeting with the front door. He said he thought something was wrong with it, but then said it was fine. The guy was really nice the whole time, but started asking some odd questions about what time I get out with all the robberies happening. I felt it was odd, and lied saying I left later than I did. Later that night I arm the alarm and go to close the door but it won't close at all. The alarm goes off. Cops fly in the parking lot. One cop starts looking at the door and finds a really small magnet that stopped the door from closing. He placed it there so I couldn't close the door. During this time a car rolls by slowly, but everyone wrote it off as someone thinking it got robbed. A couple days later they catch him and it's that dude. I see footage of his car, and it was the car that drove by while I was still with the cop. One night I had a dream that a co-worker killed me with an axe, and when I got to work the next day she was telling a fellow co-worker that she had a dream that she killed me with a knife. Sort of an odd coincidence. She never did try to kill me but it was a little bit creepy. I was about 10 and I had a huge fear of someone being in my house, to the point where I wouldn't go to the basement because it scared me. But I am glad I had that fear, because one day during the summer I was trying to go to sleep and I heard a noise from above me, and I freaked out. I then noticed over the coming days that my room was really hot, and I thought this was strange because we just got new air vents put in. My dad was checking them out and went to get some sort of tool, when I saw the scariest image possible. There was a skinny man looking at me and my dad from the vent in my ceiling. I froze and pretended not to notice him, and I went to get my dad, and me in my 10-year-old mind was instantly thinking run with him out of the house, but I have 2 cats and was scared to leave them, so I grabbed a paper towel and a pen and wrote in my chicken scratch handwriting, "There is a man in my vent," but he couldn't read it, and asked what it meant, and that's when we heard a thud, and he looked at it again and must have put it together, because he grabbed me and called the police. When my mom got home she got to see the man being dragged out of the house in cuffs. Even though he was caught and I still had a somewhat happy ending, the image of looking up and seeing his face, and being so petrified I couldn't move or scream still haunts me. I was alone in my house with my stepdad. I went to the bathroom. When I sat down on the toilet, that's when I saw someone was trying to open the door. I pushed it and said occupied, but whatever was at the other side kept trying to open the door. I called my stepdad and I heard him from the kitchen saying yeah. At that point I was terrified. It suddenly stopped. I checked the whole house for anyone other than my stepdad, didn't find anybody there. I went to the other bathroom and then used it, still don't know what the hell was at the other side of the door. Edit, I see a lot of people saying that it was probably a burglar, my pet or the wind. 1. I didn't own a pet back then. 2. My stepdad was in the kitchen, which is located right beside the hallway with all the rooms including the bathroom, so it's impossible that anyone could have sneaked to the hallway without being noticed. 3. Wind can't turn a doorknob. One evening, for some reason, I thought about a person that I had gone to college with but had not seen in more than 30 years. So I decided to Google her name to see what she had done with her life. I found her obituary. It had been posted earlier that day. If I had Googled her one day earlier, I would never have known that she had died. I was probably 9 years old, in about 1995. At that time all the schools and parents were warning us of stranger danger. It seemed like a lot of kids were getting kidnapped because they were being tricked into helping the kidnappers find a lost pet. One day I was riding my bike alone on our street. A fairly populated street, lots of kids out playing and whatnot, and a green two-door car pulled up with a woman driving and a guy in the passenger seat. The guy calls out the window to me, "Hey kid. We lost our dog, can you help us find her?" I can still remember the feeling I felt. It was like sirens were going off, and I thought for a split second that this was it, I was going to be kidnapped. A rush of what felt like burning hot adrenaline shot through my body. I felt like I could hear everything 10x louder and see everything 10x better. I've never felt anything like that before. I hopped off my bike, pulled the front tire up so I could turn around faster, and I booked it home. I was shaking and tears were pouring down my face even though I wasn't crying. I got home and told my mum what happened. She called the police, but I'm not sure if the people were ever caught. Crazy. Mom died 5 months ago, and I moved across the state into her apartment to be closer to family. I swear I heard her call my name one night. It felt so natural, hearing her voice in her own apartment, but she'd been dead over a month. I'm sure it was just a nearly asleep hallucination, but it was spooky. I would sleepwalk as a child. Usually I'd wake up in the living room, or I would freak myself out and wake up in the basement. On one occasion I had wandered outside. I was 7 or 8 and I woke up standing in the middle of my backyard one a super foggy morning right around sunrise. I quickly figured out which direction my house was and ran back to bed. I never told my parents about it because I figured they would be mad at me for going outside when I should have been asleep. We moved into a new place. Built around 1930 and sometime in the 70s had a fire. My 3-year-old, at the time, started running around the house and playing hide and seek with himself. Kids weren't allowed in our room, but our room was on the first floor and the closet was actually the underside of the stairs. He kept running in there and shouting, "Found you. Hide better." We didn't think much of it. New house. Kids have imaginary friends. Until that night when he asked if Sam could sleep in his room. He said she was lonely, but they're friends now so she can sleep with him. She doesn't want to sleep in the closet anymore. No one else ever saw her and weird things rarely happened. We moved a year later and except for the day after we moved, he asked if she can come too. He has never spoken of her again. I was home alone, laying down on my living room floor, and hardcore spacing out at the ceiling. I heard my mother scream on my front porch. I rushed out, but she wasn't there. I ran around the outside of my house. Not a single person in sight. It 10,000% sounded like my mom, and it curdled my bones because it was so raw and animalistic in its sound. I called her right away. Mom picks up the phone and I ask her if she is alright. She responds that she is and tells me to hold on for a minute while she pulls over into the parking lot of a business. She was driving and didn't want to talk on the phone at the same time. Seconds later, I hear a lot of noise and my mom screamed. An eternity stretches on before mom is calm enough to say anything coherent. She goes on to tell me how the car in front of her and the one behind her, before she pulled over, the ones that continued on the same path of travel that she had been on, had been struck by a speeding semi that ran a red light at the next intersection. It was a terrible accident with extensive injuries. The semi clipped the rear of the front vehicle and front of the rear vehicle. My mom's car would have been hit dead center. We always joke that we are psychic, as this is not the first instance like it that we have had, but it was definitely the most freaky of the bunch. TL, doctor, I'm psychic and saved my mum's life. I was home alone sleeping, when all of a sudden I felt a presence crawling up onto my bed. I can hear the sheets ruffling and feel the bed sinking. All while I hear a soft laughter getting louder and more intense as it gets closer to me. Finally, after what felt like it was literally next to my ear, I wake up. As I turn my head to look to see what the hell was laughing at me, I see this nondescript figure hovering over me and burst out in what I could only describe as the most aggressive laughter, all while shaking my bed violently. My head felt like it was being rattled from all the shaking. At that moment I wanted to scream as loudly as I could, but I could not summon the strength to so much as turn my head away from what I was seeing. I was terrified and angry. Angry at myself for being absolutely terrified and not being able to even attempt to defend myself from this creature that had spent what felt like minutes taunting me. When I was finally able to muster the strength to fight back, it had already disappeared from the room with its laughs echoing. Most of my life I've had what I call normal life prediction dreams, where I'll have a very vivid dream of like me and two of my friends driving on a road I know after seeing a movie, and then it just happens sometime after. Well, more recently I had a dream where I was running late for work, and I hopped in my car, turned the key, and the car exploded, sending me to the ER and keeping me hospitalized for about a year. I remember it being very sunny, and I had a grey shirt that said technically the glass is completely full, and I was wearing a Legend of Zelda hat. Well, lo and fucking behold, I am late for work, and the shirt and hat that are easiest to grab are those two. I step outside and get blindsided by the sun. I decided to call off work that day, claiming I was taking a personal health day, and had my stepdad come look at my car. Turns out that there was a problem with the fuel line and oil, so it would have been bad had the key sparked. And this car was already on death's door, so we just sold it for parts. I used to live in a one-bedroom apartment with a den. In the den we had a spare bed for visitors or whatever. One night my boyfriend was super sick, so I went and slept in the spare bed. In the middle of the night I had what seemed to be sleep paralysis, where I couldn't move but was seemingly awake. In that state I saw a dark figure walk into the room and just stand over me for a while. Like the dark figure was right over my face. The next day I was very freaked out. I told my boyfriend and he asked if I was joking. The same night he saw a dark shadowy figure in our bedroom, pacing in front of the bed. He said he slept with the light on all night, which had explained why it was on the next morning when I went into the room. This happened about a year ago and we haven't talked about it since. We'd rather forget that entire night happened. I have a very vivid memory of waking up terrified in the middle of the night and running to my parents' room because I saw a ghost when I was a kid. He followed me and stared at me from the doorway as I crawled into their bed and hid under the covers. We looked at each other for a few minutes and then he left. I was so shaken that I stayed awake the rest of the night until my parents woke up in the morning. I was an adult when I realized that it was not a ghost and actually someone scoping out our house in the middle of the night. One that I can remember. I own a split-level apartment and live on the bottom floor. The old upstairs tenant would sit outside smoking cigarettes, drinking, and watching videos on his phone until about 4 to 5 a.m. every day. We live in an okay part of a city with some major crime issues. One night sitting out though, he was the victim of an attempted armed robbery, but didn't give anything up. At this point my work-sleep schedule was getting completely out of whack and causing some really weird dreams/sleep habits. Where he sits every night is next to my bedroom window. I told him that if he was ever in trouble to bang on my window and I would be outside as soon as possible. One night, weeks later, I get woken up by a frantic banging on my window. I grabbed my pistol that I keep next to my bed and sprint outside wearing only my underwear. I have to exit out of the back of the house and run around front, and I am greeted by an empty porch, and dead silent, empty street at about 4 a.m. I asked him about it the next day and he says he wasn't even outside that night. The most disturbing part about it is just how real the sounds were. This happened literally Friday night. My son is about 10 months old and absolutely hates sleep. He will sleep in his crib until about 3 to 4 a.m. then wake up screaming for a bottle, then spend the rest of the night in our bed. Friday night he woke up screaming and I got up and went to the kitchen to make him a bottle. I turned towards the nightlight in the kitchen so I could pour the water to the right level when I heard a woman humming in a soothing way behind me. It wasn't like a quick thing. It was a full 10 seconds of HMMMHMMMHMMMM. My son started screaming even harder as soon as the humming stopped. I dropped the bottle and booked it to our baby's room to check him and our room to make sure it wasn't my wife. He was fine and she was dead ass asleep with the door still closed like I left it. I had to wake her up. He has no toys that make the humming sound I heard. I still have no idea what the fuck it was. The freakiest part was how hard he screamed when it stopped. My girlfriend, now wife, called me one Monday night and told me she had an uneasy feeling that something horrible was about to happen. She kept repeating it, and couldn't really explain the feeling she had. She had never said anything like that before, and hasn't since. Of course, earlier that day I had, unbeknownst to her, picked up her engagement ring and was holding it when she called me. So that didn't exactly boost my self-confidence, as you can imagine. That was September 10, 2001.